The morning the carriage left her behind, it did not stop for her tears. The wheels crushed gravel without mercy, carrying away the only family she had ever known, and the dust it lifted into the sky felt like the final curtain closing on her life. Clara Whitmore sat on the wooden porch of the boarding house, her thin shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, her lifeless legs stretched beneath her like forgotten things that belonged to someone else. She did not scream. She did not beg. She had learned long ago that pity was a colder companion than loneliness. She was born different. Fever had taken her strength at 6 years old, leaving her legs twisted and unresponsive. Doctors had called it a tragedy. Her father had called it a burden. And her stepmother had never called her anything at all unless it was to complain about the cost of keeping her alive. When Clara turned 21, her father remarried again and moved west with his new wife, chasing land and fortune. There was no room in their wagon for a daughter who could not walk. "Life is hard enough," he had muttered, avoiding her eyes. So they left her in a small rural town with a few coins, a worn blanket, and silence that swallowed her whole. For weeks, Clara survived by sewing small repairs for townsfolk. She worked with careful hands and quiet dignity. Some people were kind. Most were not. She heard the whispers, "Poor thing. Who would ever marry her? She's better off in a church home." But Clara had something they did not see. A mind that burned bright. A heart that refused to harden. And then came the farmer. His name was Daniel Harper. He was known around town as the Quiet One. Tall, broad-shouldered, with hands shaped by years of soil and struggle. His land sat on the edge of town, wide and lonely as the sky. He rarely spoke unless necessary. People said he preferred animals to humans. Some said his heart had been broken once and never healed. He first saw Clara when her sewing basket tipped over in the mud outside the general store. Buttons and thread scattered across the dirt, and passers-by stepped around her like she was part of the ground itself. Daniel did not step around her. He knelt. Without a word, he gathered every spool of thread, brushing dirt from delicate lace as if it were silk from a queen's gown. He noticed how she avoided meeting his eyes. He noticed how her hands trembled, not from weakness, but from humiliation. "Where do you live?" he asked gently. She hesitated. No one had asked her that with concern before. "Boarding house on Maple," she replied softly. He studied her legs briefly but did not stare. "You shouldn't be carrying all this alone." A flicker of defiance sparked in her eyes. "I manage." "I can see that," he said, not unkindly. The next day, he returned. And the day after that. Sometimes he brought fresh eggs. Sometimes milk. Once, he brought a small wooden stool he had carved himself, shaped perfectly to support her back while she worked. Town gossip ignited like wildfire. What does Daniel Harper want with a crippled girl? He could marry strong women with dowries. He's lonely, that's all. But loneliness was not what Daniel saw when he looked at Clara. He saw strength. He saw intelligence. He saw the way she laughed when something truly amused her, rare, but radiant. Weeks turned into months. He began repairing the boarding house ramp so she could move more easily. He adjusted his wagon with a steady platform so she could ride safely beside him when he took produce to market. For the first time in years, Clara saw fields stretching into golden horizons instead of ceilings stained with dampness. On the farm, she discovered purpose beyond survival. She kept account books flawlessly. She designed better storage methods for grain. She even suggested rotating crops in ways Daniel had never considered. His yields improved. One evening, as sunset bled across the sky in orange fire, Clara whispered, "Why are you doing this?" Daniel did not answer immediately. He leaned against the fence, hat in his rough hands. "Because I don't see what they see," he finally said. "They see what you can't do. I see everything you can." Her throat tightened. No one had ever said that to her. But the world was not ready to accept their quiet bond. When Daniel announced he planned to bring Clara permanently to live at the farmhouse, giving her the front room with sunlight and access to the yard, the town reacted with outrage. The pastor visited him. "It's not proper," he insisted. Merchants warned him his reputation would suffer. Even his own distant cousin accused him of ruining his chances for a real family. Daniel listened. Then he closed the door. And built her a home. If you're already feeling your heart pull toward Clara and Daniel's story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss powerful stories about love, strength, and second chances. The most beautiful journeys are just beginning. But storms were gathering on the horizon, both in the sky and in the hearts of those who disapproved. And sometimes, love must be tested before it becomes unbreakable. The night the storm came, it did not knock politely. Wind tore through the fields like a furious spirit, bending crops nearly to their breaking point. Rain slammed against the farmhouse windows. Clara sat near the hearth, fear creeping into her chest as thunder shook the walls. Daniel had gone to secure the livestock. Minutes felt like hours. When the barn doors burst open from their hinges, Daniel was thrown against the mud, pinned beneath splintered wood. A fallen beam crushed his leg. By the time Clara heard the crash, she knew something was wrong. And for the first time in her life, the girl who could not walk refused to remain still. She dragged herself from her chair, gripping doorframes, pulling forward inch by inch across the wooden floor. Rain lashed her face as she crossed the threshold. Mud soaked her dress as she crawled into the storm. She screamed his name. She found him barely conscious, rain washing blood into the dirt. There was no one else. No neighbors close enough. No town hero riding in. Only her. Clara braced her arms against the beam and pushed with every ounce of strength she had built through years of lifting herself, carrying her own weight, surviving a world that underestimated her. It moved. Not easily. But enough. She freed his leg and dragged him, inch by painful inch, back toward the house. Her hands tore. Her knees bruised. Lightning split the sky. But she did not stop. By morning, the storm had passed. And Daniel was alive. Weeks followed with Daniel confined to bed, his leg fractured badly. The farmer who had carried everyone now needed carrying. And Clara did. She managed the farm from a ledger and a chair. She directed hired hands. She negotiated with buyers. She adapted tools so she could milk cows seated. She refused pity from anyone. The town watched in stunned silence. Harvest season arrived stronger than ever. And when Daniel finally stood again, limping, but steady, he looked at Clara as though seeing her anew. "You saved me," he said quietly. She smiled through tears. "You once told me you saw what I could do." He knelt before her, careful of his healing leg. "Marry me, Clara. Not because I pity you. Not because I'm lonely. But because you are the strongest person I know." There were no grand audiences. No church bells ringing dramatically. Just a farmhouse. A sunrise. And two hearts choosing each other without conditions. The wedding was small. But something remarkable happened. The same townsfolk who once whispered began bringing gifts. Bread. Quilts. Tools. Apologies hidden behind awkward smiles. Because love had proven something powerful. It was not measured in steps taken. It was measured in strength shared. Years later, travelers passing by would speak of the Harper farm as the most prosperous in the county. They would see Clara seated proudly on the porch, children gathered around her, adopted, loved, cherished. They would see Daniel working fields with quiet pride. And they would never guess she had once been left behind. Because she wasn't left. She was chosen. And sometimes, the greatest love stories are not about rescuing someone from weakness, but recognizing the strength they carried all along. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable tales of courage, redemption, and powerful love. Stories like this remind us that limits exist only where love refuses to look deeper. And Daniel Harper knew something the world had forgotten. Love doesn't see broken legs. It sees unbreakable hearts.